Good morning, and welcome to all of you, and happy Halloween. I am Margaret Lowe. I'm president of AtlanticLIVE, the events division of The Atlantic, and we have the privilege of bringing the Atlantic's journalism to stages across the country, and we are so delighted to be here in New York City for the third annual summit on the future of work. There are, I think as everybody in this room knows, huge forces defining that future: globalization, advances in technology, demographic and socioeconomic changes, the move to cities, longer lives, and later retirements. Our purpose here today is to explore some of the big questions that emerge from all this. Will machines ultimately do our jobs? What will the new jobs be? Will we even have traditional jobs, or will the gig economy take over? Will we work from home or from a co-working space? New York is the perfect place to hold this summit because every trend is so evident here. 8.6 million people live in this city, and Midtown Manhattan, where we are today, is the largest business district in the world. In the big, elegant office buildings surrounding us with Carnegie Hall and the Russian Tea Room across the street, some people find their fortune. But for so many, working life is just plain hard. Yes, the unemployment rate is falling. In this city, it's at record lows. And yes, jobs are plentiful. Nonetheless, people don't necessarily have the skills to fill those jobs, and in some neighborhoods, the unemployment rate is crazy high. Wages have not kept up with the cost of life, of housing and groceries. So many new jobs created in New York are low-wage service sector jobs like childcare and retail. Many jobs have no benefits at all, and there are profound pain points. No doubt that the way people earn a living is changing rapidly. There is so much to discuss. Over the course of our day, we'll ask the essential questions. We'll look at our economy with the president of the New York Stock Exchange. We'll talk about universal basic income and learn how social media sites are driving commerce for small businesses. We'll talk to entrepreneurs, to freelancers, and a university president. We expect it to be a very lively and very interesting day, and I want to say that absolutely none of this would be possible without our underwriters. They are AARP, McDonald's, PwC, and Walmart. We could not do this without you. Thank you all so much. Now for less lofty practical notes, please silence your cell phones. Don't put them away because we are on Twitter at AtlanticLIVE, and we would love you to join the conversation using the hashtag FutureWork2018. That's all one word. We want you to be part of the conversation in the room too, so we'll have time for your questions throughout the day. And if you need fuel, coffee will be free-flowing in the back. Don't hesitate to get up and grab a cup. And if you'll notice at your tables, if anything makes you anxious that we're talking about, we have provided stress balls for you. Now, let's get rolling. To kick us off, we begin with a high-level look at the state of jobs. For that, please welcome Phil Thompson. He is New York City's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. And here to lead the conversation is my colleague, Atlantic staff writer Derek Thompson, the host of the Crazy Genius podcast. Derek, Phil, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. We were just talking backstage about how every single issue that I find most interesting in the issue of on the topic of economic mobility, whether it's early childhood intervention or mentorship. Phil, you are working on a policy that's related to it, and this is happening interestingly. And Phil said, we can't just focus on one policy or another. This is a life cycle challenge. Economic mobility is a life cycle challenge. The American dream is a life cycle challenge. So in the next 15 minutes, we're going to take you through that lifestyle. We're going to start at the cradle, and we're going to end somewhere near, not necessarily the grave, but the distant future. So let's start at the very beginning. There are some studies that seem to suggest that the achievement gap between rich and poor students seems to open up and crystallize not at the age of 18 or 10, but at the age of 5, which would suggest that in order to create equity, you need to intervene sooner. You need to intervene maybe even before kindergarten. So let's start there. What is the city doing in terms of early childhood intervention?
Let me first frame the problem. And during the Industrial Revolution, 80% of folks, women or people of color in New York, 80% of the population are women or people of color. During the Industrial Revolution, most of those folks were stuck on a cotton plantation or stuck on a banana plantation, or in the case of women, locked in the kitchen, and missed the Industrial Revolution. There were a lot of white men who were in dangerous and bad-paying jobs, and that's why we had unions, but women and people of color didn't even get that. We kind of missed the Industrial Revolution. Now we're on the verge of a technological revolution that will affect everything, and a green revolution that will affect everything. And our challenge is to make sure that 80% of our population doesn't miss this one. And so that's the context in which we look at education and early education, and that is, in order for New York City to be competitive, to be a leader in the future, 10 years out, 15 years out, we need to start at age 3 and even earlier. So Mayor de Blasio initiated, when he came into office, the pre-K for 4-year-olds. So working parents who had a 4-year-old, they had somewhere to put their kid where they would get a quality education, preschool at age 4. And this year we launched 3K, which is the same thing for 3-year-olds. And the whole idea is, at the earliest age, to begin to expose these kids to new ways of learning, to interactive sort of ways of learning how to work together, socio-emotional health, and so on.
Yeah. So moving from early childhood to later childhood, there's an issue that economists are starting to look at really, really seriously that might seem a little bit soft at first, but it's really important. It's mentorship. There was a Raj Chetty paper on economic mobility that found that a really, really important input in the outcomes of children isn't necessarily having a father at home, even though that's important. More important is father presence in the neighborhood, father presence in the city, meaning the share of households in that area that have 2 parents, including a father. And there's other studies that seem to suggest that mentorship for young women plays a huge role in terms of exposure. That, for example, if you have a high school class and you bring in a woman who comes from the business community, the tech community, and tells them about her experience, her life, her success, it raises the share of women in that high school class by 20% who go into STEM, who major in STEM, and they become more likely to enter those fields after they graduate. So say a little bit about how New York City is trying to give young men and women mentors that have these sort of outcomes.
Let me say 2 things. One, I was head of MIT's diversity committee as a professor when soon after Larry Summers made a statement that women can't do math or biology, something. And at the time, I think our women faculty was 8%, and now it's 42%. And it actually was making MIT a welcoming place for women and having other women, network, so it was a welcoming and warm place for women to be. But we didn't have a problem finding women who were qualified. With New York City, and we have something called New York's NYC Men Teach, and this was an effort to recruit 1,000 Black and Latino men as teachers to inspire young boys in particular, all students, but young boys in particular, to succeed in school. And one of the things I'm emphasizing with the 1,000 that we have, training them in STEM so they can be STEM leaders or STEAM leaders in the schools, because a lot of our young folks don't see themselves playing a role in the tech economy. And we want to change that image. I have a cousin who was a basketball player, a very good one, in high school and college, and then he got turned on in a computer science class late in his college career. And he said, when I watch TV and they film basketball games, you don't see what I see as a basketball player. So he took what he learned in school and created a company called Skycam, which is a camera that flies on wires, and he invented a way to control it with a laptop and a joystick, and that's what they use on NFL football now,
that's right,
and so on. And what he does, a month ago, he and I had 100 Upward Bound kids from Chicago. He brought them here, and we just told our stories. He said, look at me, I'm you. You know, and you can do this too. Tech isn't just something for kids at MIT and Stanford. Bring what you've got, because MIT kids and Stanford kids really aren't good basketball players generally. I brought what I had. I had something different, and so do you. And you can bring that into tech and get young people inspired. Let them know they have a lot to contribute.
Yeah. What about in college? New York City's colleges have, according to some studies, one of the best records of upward mobility. That is, they have one of the best records of taking kids who are in the bottom 50% of earning families, and they graduate and become top 50% earners. To what do you credit CUNY's success as an engine of upward mobility, and how do you keep it going in the future?
Well, first of all, I think CUNY is immensely important. We have 275,000 students in CUNY and another 250,000 part-time students in CUNY. And as goes CUNY, so goes New York in terms of our future economy. And we need to invest in CUNY to make it a top-rate university, public university, and the trends overall have been in the opposite direction. So that's a challenge. Within that, though, CUNY has taken aggressive steps to, there's a program called ASAP that provides things like Metro cards to make it easier for students to attend classes at different campuses that may be in their line of interest. Right now, it's expensive for them to do that, and other kinds of mentoring and supports while in college. Those things are amazing in terms of the results. But CUNY also is introducing more computer science classes, and we are doing more to integrate CUNY with things like our summer youth program, which has young people from 16 to 24, instead of a summer job, which the city pays for, there's 75,000 of them, being disconnected from what people are learning in school. Our transition now is to make these jobs more career pathways, linked up with what they're learning at CUNY or in our public schools, so it's a year-round learning experience. And CUNY is innovating, experimenting with these kinds of things in a big way.
Right. So we've taken our hypothetical New Yorker through early childhood education, through pre-K and 3K, through high school, through college. Now it's time to graduate and hopefully find a place to live in New York City. I wrote a piece about 2 weeks ago on the scourge of retail vacancies around Manhattan. And if you guys live in Manhattan, you've surely noticed them if you've been along Fifth Avenue or the West Village. There's a lot of factors that seem to be causing this glut of, or this scourge of retail vacancies. Amazon might be one of them, but another one is the high cost of renting space. That the city seems to be suffering a curse of its own affluence, that these leasing costs have risen to a level at which upwardly mobile startups cannot breathe. And I was writing that, I was thinking this is sort of a metaphor for the state of New York families as well, that the cost of housing in New York may have risen to a level at which middle-class and lower-middle-class families simply cannot afford. So housing is obviously an economic issue. What is the city doing right now to ensure that we have more affordable housing for the lower and lower middle-class families who need to move here so that they can become a story, the next story of the American dream for the next generation?
I'm an urban planner. So one of the first things I have to say is that the United States has a historic anti-urban bias. You can go back to Thomas Jefferson, you know. The idea was we have an endless frontier, and if things aren't good in the city, there's better things out in the countryside, or go west, young man. You know, that's part of our culture. Sprawl, urban sprawl, is the most carbon-intensive activity in the history of humankind. It is unsustainable. We actually want dense cities so that we can preserve our green spaces, our open spaces. We don't want more and more sprawl. However, that means property, it has to be regulated, because otherwise existing property owners can extract all the rents as you move people in, and we're seeing that. And so I think at one level, in terms of our federal policy, we have to stop just subsidizing. Right now, most of our housing subsidies are the mortgage interest write-off. And it goes, if you own 14 houses like John Kerry, you get 14 write-offs. And it's regressive instead of progressive, and we need federal policies that actually enable us to have more dense cities without killing the little folks. Secondly, at the state level in New York, we're losing more housing units due to deregulation, houses leaving rent stabilization, rent control. Then we are replacing them with new affordable units, even though we're doing more affordable units than any other government in the history of New York City. We're still not keeping up. And the last thing I would say is we have unions in New York with hundreds of billions of dollars in pension investments. They could be investing those to do placemaking in and around New York City for affordable housing. Co-op City was built entirely with union funds in the 50s. We aren't doing that in Portchester and Yonkers and other places, and we have to start thinking about innovative ways and partnerships to create affordable housing. Unions members are the people we're talking about. They ought to be in the business of helping make life more affordable, more tolerable for their people.
So from early childhood education to housing policy, and now we're going to take something that might seem like a swerve, but I promise that it isn't. 2 years ago, a Parisian economist, Andrew Clark, published a paper that asked people what are the causes of what he called misery. And misery he defined as people who are at the bottom 10%, the bottom decile of self-reported life satisfaction. And he said, obviously, income plays a large role, poverty plays a large role. Obviously, unemployment plays a large role. But there's something else that's 3 times more dispositive of what he called misery, and that was mental health challenges. And he is encouraging the world to think about mental health as an economic issue. The city of New York thinks of mental health as an economic issue. And I'd like to know how. How exactly do you work with New York City's population to improve mental health? And how do you view it through the prism of helping people keep jobs and stay happy?
Well, the city has an initiative called Thrive, which I help oversee, which is almost $1 billion of city tax levy money, which we are spending now on community mental health interventions. 8% of kids in our public schools attempt suicide before graduation. That's over 80,000 kids attempt suicide. That's what we know about. And so we have huge social-emotional challenges in the city. And it doesn't just affect young people, it doesn't just affect poor people, it actually affects all segments and parts of our population. But if we don't deal with that, our kids will not learn in school, they will not do well on the job. And so we are making that an integral part of everything we do. And we have citywide, we have the police department and our human services agencies and our schools and everybody sitting around the table working together on how do we create a culture of where people can talk about these issues, there's not stigma, when there's a culture of collaboration and we all work together as a big family. Now, interestingly enough, what's really innovative and new about the tech economy, where it's most successful and productive, is where you have collaboration also. And so the new economy could be a welcoming space where we encourage collaboration and inclusion and sharing of ideas. And that kind of thing it needs to be through every single institution in our society. So that's what we're aiming for. And we hope that the tenor starts at the top with our federal administration. A lot of the rhetoric these days about attacking immigrants, we have 3.6 million immigrants in New York, doesn't help. Immigrant groups are terrified right now, feel very insecure about what's going on. A lot of the divisiveness that we have in our broader culture doesn't help. So we're trying to address it at all levels.
That's great. I think we have time for a couple questions, is that right? We've got 2 mics here and here. If no one has an immediate question, and I understand it's early, only so much coffee has been consumed. Well, we have one right here.
Good morning, Stella Lubushor, Reframework. We talk a lot about the investment in younger generation and early childhood development. What about people as they get older and get marginalized and social protection system do not provide them what they need? Is there anything that the New York is doing in terms of upskilling them and providing opportunities to stay employed or financially secure in the long term?
So we invest heavily in workforce development, and we're reviewing all of our workforce development programs to better align them with what's emerging in, say, advanced manufacturing, what's emerging in healthcare, so that workers can transition from where they are now into these new fields. Also, we're trying to address problems like home care, where 1 in 5 New Yorkers are going to be elderly. That's actually going to be the biggest job growth category, but young people don't want to go into home care because it pays minimum wage, you don't get good skills training. That actually is going to cost all of us a lot of money, because if old people are running in and out of emergency rooms because their home care worker doesn't know how to deal with diabetes or doesn't know how to deal with other illnesses that frail elderly have, we're going to pay a huge price for that. So we're also trying to push for different standards and programs in sectors like that. For beginners. The other thing is we're experimenting with collaboration. So last week I met with the head of Downstate Medical School, which is the largest in the country. It's in central Brooklyn. It's right near Medgar Evers College, which is part of CUNY, which has 1,400 students enrolled in health sciences. 0 go to medical school, even though Downstate's right there. We had the head of several hospitals in central Brooklyn, and we had our public education leaders all in a room, saying, how do we all collaborate so that we actually work with young people from preschool all the way through medical school and residency? How do we create a system that crosses all these different silos? Because right now, the different systems don't speak to each other. So we also want to do that in other sectors as well. So those are some of the things we're working on.
Great. That's all we have time for, but thank you very much, and thank you.